back with Coffee Buddy. In this episode, I'm going to make some changes to the structure of the project. Instead of having all of my files in the Coffee Buddy directory, I'm creating subfolders for the individual episodes that I produce. And that way, in the GitHub repository, you can just download the files for each video, depending on where you want to begin. In addition, you can compare your work with what I've done in the video in case there's any discrepancies. So let's get started with episode number 6. So let's jump into VS Code and get started. So what I'm going to do is create a new folder called 06. And I'm just going to copy the index and the style sheet and paste it into 06. And then finally, I'm going to copy images, and I'm actually going to paste those outside the directory. So my rationale here is I'm just trying to save some file storage. There's no sense in having the images in every single folder. But since I haven't been doing this way, I've got a copy of the images in episode 5 and episode 00. So when I do that, that's going to break all of our image links. So I can go to my preview and we'll take a look at Coffee Buddy 06. And now we can see that the image doesn't show up. So let's fix that. What I'm going to need to do is I'm going to have to append all of my image links with .. What that's going to do is it's going to leave the 06 folder. The browser would leave the folder and go up a level to the root folder and then look for the folder called images. So ... is sort of like going out of the existing folder into the parent folder and then looking for images and finding logo.svg. So if I save this, I should be able to test it. And oops, that's our design doc. If I refresh, now we can find our logo. Okay, so going forward, I'm just going to start using this ... technique to find the images here rather than within my subdirectory. If you don't want to do it that way, that's probably more realistic. But like I said, just for the sake of organization and storage, I'm just going to do it this way. So what I want to do today is tackle something that's not really shown on the design document. If I open up the design doc, what we see is, oops, got some selections there. What we can see is kind of this full view of the page. What we can't see, because this is a static design, is what would this look like if somebody resized their browser? If I had a really large monitor, where would how far apart could I stretch the Coffee Buddy logo and the nav bar? So, you know, we're not really getting into too much responsive design stuff, but there sort of should be a limit. Like if I have a massive iMac, I would be able to just go into full screen in Safari and Coffee Buddy and this nav bar, there would be a ton of space in between these two things. So what I'm going to do is create a container that has a maximum width, and I'm going to use that container for most of my design. You can sort of see that there's a smaller container width on these objects here. You can see that they have a similar width, and then when I come up here, this has a different width. So we'll have a container for our header, and we'll have a container for the rest of our content as well. So let's try that out. So in my CSS file, what I would do to create the container class is I would say dot container, and then I would establish a max width. Let's set this to something like 800 pixels. Now when I jump back into my preview, if I refresh, we don't see a change. And that's because visually I've constrained the width, but you can't really see that width of take a change here. Oh, let's see if we can do this. I haven't applied it anywhere. That's the problem. So we've created a container class who said max width 800, and then in my index I have my header and I have my article. Now the header just contains the logo and the nav bar, so let's actually go into the article and add the class like that. Now as I scroll down, you can see that the text breaks a little sooner, and that's because I've limited it to 800 pixels wide. So for the nav bar, we'll probably make that a little bit bigger. And it's a really easy way to do that. I'm sorry, not the nav bar, but for the header, which contains the logo and the nav bar, we're going to set the maximum width to a little bit bigger. And we're using max width because if I resize the browser smaller, we can see that the text doesn't end up overflowing the browser. I don't have to scroll left and right to read this. It will let me resize smaller, but as I go bigger with the browser, as I go wider, it just stops. Now ideally we'd like to center this in our web browser. So if I make this browser really wide, this content will always be in the middle. So let's see how we can do that. In the container here, let's add a background color so it's a little bit easier to recognize. So now we can see our background colors being applied here. That's just for presentation here for the video. I'm obviously going to take that out. So now how do we center this? Simple technique to center a container is by setting the margin on the left and the right to auto. So now, wherever our container has been applied, the content inside the container is sort of in the middle. So the whole box is centered left to right on my screen. And that's just how we do that. Now let's take a look at the header and let's apply our container to the header as well. So if I go into index, I can select the header and I can create a class and give it the class of container, and then when I refresh the page I'll see that that 800 has been applied. Now like I said before, I want it to actually be a little bit wider, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a different selector in CSS that affects just that header. So here I'll say a header with a class container, and we'll override the max width to 1200 pixels. So now you can see that the container class, the background image carried through because that we're using CSS, and that's the cascade behavior. So that background color is still active on both containers, but I've overridden the maximum width. So now we can see that that's a little bit wider than the content on the rest of the body on the article, and that's a little closer to what we see here. So that's a simple explanation of that, and in the next video we will work on that header a little more. Thanks for watching.